Now, when I want a steak and I want something different and fast, this is really the one and only recipe of steak that I cook for myself. And it's so good and so addicting, it's probably gonna be the only one you cook for yourself. And it's all gonna come together in the blink of an eye, so let's just jump right into it. Now, what I have here is a boneless ribeye. And the ribeye usually comes with 2 muscles attached. You've got the eye of the ribeye and then the ribeye cap. But when I'm shopping, I'm looking for the biggest eye I can find with the most marbling in it, along with the biggest ribeye cap, because the ribeye cap is some of the best meat on the cow and it's my favorite part of the ribeye, so I wanna make sure I get a good amount of that. And usually if I'm cooking a thicker steak, maybe something like that's 3 fingers thick, I will salt it, throw it in the refrigerator overnight, and that's gonna dry out the surface and season the meat. But this is thinner. This is about a 1-inch steak, 2 finger thick. We can cook this straight up. We can just allow this to come down to room temperature a bit. And because we wanna make sure we dry that surface of any moisture, I'm gonna take a paper towel, and while it comes down to room temperature, I'm just gonna allow it to sit and allow the paper towel to sort of soak up any moisture that might be on the surface, just so it sears and it doesn't steam when it makes contact in the pan. We're just gonna set this off to the side and we can talk about the rest of the ingredients. And now the basis for this recipe is essentially we're making a brown butter steak. That's the method. But the flavoring is what's gonna take this to sort of a different level. It obviously starts with some butter. We got about 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter. I've got thyme and 2 cloves of garlic. Those are gonna infuse the flavor of the butter. And then we're gonna use the brown butter to actually form a sauce so we don't waste it like is normally done when you make a brown butter steak. We're gonna take that, we're gonna add some acidity with some hot cherry peppers in there, liquid, some lemon, and then instead of some flaky salt on top to finish it, I'm adding some Parmigiano Reggiano and some dried oregano. And that might sound weird to you, but I just love it. I think it goes really well and it adds a real kind of fun Italian twist to just a regular throw it together quick steak. But first I need to just chop up my cherry peppers. Now I need about a 1/4 cup of diced cherry peppers. So I'm gonna just eyeball the amount, stack them up, and then slice them one way, turn them 90 degrees, and then chop them into a fine dice. Then place them into a bowl and add a little bit of the liquid that they were packed in. Then we need about 2 cloves of garlic. I'm just gonna give them a smash, remove their skins, and they're smashed just enough to release their juices, but still in big enough pieces to resist burning. So now this is ready to be cooked. What we're going to do is right before we cook it, I'm gonna lightly coat on both sides of the oil and then season it heavily with some nice kosher salt. Season it more than you think, because most of the salt that you season it with won't actually make it onto the steak in the end. You gotta remember that. And plus all that seasoning not only has to season the surface of the meat, but all of the meat inside of the steak that didn't touch seasoning. That's why you see people season the hell out of a steak, because it is a little bit harder to over salt it, although it is possible. And then to cook it, all we really need is our lemon, our cherry peppers, garlic, thyme, and butter. And to ensure a really great sear, if you've got a press like this, it will come in handy. I'm just gonna use a simple 10-inch stainless steel frying pan for this, something everyone should have available. Get it on high heat and allow it to preheat while we prep our steak. Take a little bit of neutral oil and lightly coat each side of the steak. We don't need too much, just enough to bind the salt to the steak. Then liberally season that side of the steak, making sure you evenly distribute the salt throughout the entire surface of the steak. Give it a flip and season the other side. Once the pan is hot, add enough oil to coat the bottom of the pan. Then we're gonna gently place the steak into the pan and then apply that press on top to make sure we get a nice contact with the pan and to try and get a really good sear on that first side. Now I'm gonna use my timer to keep track of how long I'm searing each side, and I'm going for 2 minutes a side for this first sear. So I'm gonna do my best in 2 minutes to get the best sear I can on this one side. This wire rack's dirty. I'm gonna throw that in the sink and replace it with a clean one, which I'm going to use to rest the steak. Now what I'm looking for is the edges of the steak. I'm looking for a good caramelization, a really dark brown developing. Now 2 minutes is up, I gotta give it a flip. Now sometimes you get a really great sear, sometimes it's a little spotty, depending on how the cut of ribeye was butchered. So I didn't get a great sear in the center of the steak, which is totally fine. What I'm gonna do now is, while that other side sears, start basting some of those pale spots of the top of the steak that didn't get such a nice sear with that really hot oil. And the rib cap got a really nice sear as it sits along the edge of the pan. So I'm just focusing the basting towards those spots on the center of the eye that need it. And after about 4 minutes so far of cooking, that side should be nicely browned. We're gonna drain that oil, and we're gonna replace that oil with the butter, the garlic, and the thyme. Then we wanna allow that butter to melt, get bubbly and foamy and brown, and the flavor will change to a slight nuttiness, and it'll be like this hot frying oil, and we're just gonna continue to baste the steak, baste those pale areas, continue to try and develop some color on those pale spots, and just baste this steak in that butter for another 2 minutes. Now that butter has a ton of flavor, so those flavors are going to be transferred into the steak. Around 5.5 minutes, I'm gonna start poking it to check for doneness, and if I press firmly and it springs back, it's about medium rare, and that's how I like it. And the only way to get used to doing that by hand is by cooking lots of steaks. So now I'm gonna remove the steak from the pan with the thyme and the garlic. So now the steak is resting, we can finish our butter sauce. I'm gonna turn the heat off because that butter is just way too hot, and I'm gonna use a lemon and just sort of squeeze it in these little quick bursts. And those little bursts of lemon juice are gonna slowly cool the oil down. And you're gonna get a little reaction, but it's not gonna be too violent if you do it in these little kind of bursts. Once it's cooled down, you can add the rest, and then we can go in with our cherry peppers and their liquid, and there should just be a little simmer going on, nothing too crazy, and then we can just stir it all together, and that sauce is just about done. We can bring that over to the counter to start plating. This is a 1-inch steak. If you had a 1.5-inch steak to a 2-inch steak, you're gonna need a few more minutes cooking this thing. Now take a large flat plate and just pour every last ounce of that sauce onto the plate, and then spread it out a little bit to just make a space to place the steak in the middle of the plate. Now we've allowed the steak to rest about 5 minutes, we're going to cut it. We want to remove the rib cap from the ribeye and remove any of unwanted fat or sinew. Some people want that, I don't. Then we're just going to slice the ribeye into slices, not too thick, not too thin. Then we want to cut the rib cap and just try and maintain its shape so we can sort of put it back together on the plate. The cook on this steak is perfect for me. Now place the steak onto the plate. I like to alternate a piece standing up and a piece laying down just so you can see the doneness, and then place the rib cap next to it. And any juices that accumulated during resting, you want to pour those onto the plate as well. Then finish with some Parmigiano Reggiano, some dried oregano. And this is how I cook a steak whenever I'm cooking for myself. It's quick, it's easy, it's bright, it's vibrant, it's spicy. The cheese gives a saltiness to finish. And with a steak this thin, it's really not much room for error. So to make sure you cook this thing right, just be in the moment, be present, and you're gonna be able to cook a perfect steak just like this. I mean, you just gotta try the flavors of this steak. The brown butter just makes a perfect sauce. It's used as sauces in Italian food all the time. It's got the acidity of any steak sauce you'd love, except it's vinegary, it's spicy. And my favorite part, the rib cap. Heaven. Once you try steak like this, you're gonna be a full-blown addict. Full recipe is gonna be down in the description. That's all I've got today. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care of yourself and go feed yourself.